So Carrie Soto is a record-breaking, well, and it was so well done. I am a huge fan of, how do I say it without saying it? I can't say it without saying it. 4 different characters, actors, voice actors. How is it that I like just read this book and I'm already confusing people's names? Get it together. And I was like, I like revenge. I will completely just flag this for a later day. Let's get right into the rub. Hi everybody, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse, and welcome to part 2 of what I read in August. So I know in part 1, I was talking about how I was like nearing the end of a book and hoping to finish one more book. I wound up reading 14 books this month, which I never do. I don't think I've ever done before, and I'm kind of like, how did this happen? But I was listening to so many audiobooks and I was just in such a groove, and I also compulsively read multiple books because I just couldn't get enough of them. So on the flip side, I did not do a lot of stuff in the rest of my life in lieu of reading, or because I was reading so much. But anyway, all in, I had a tremendous reading month, and I've got some of my faves of the month slash definitely maybe 2 that I can guarantee are gonna be on my best of for the year list. So let's jump in and see the rest of what I read. The first book I want to talk about is Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So I had the audiobook, apologies, this is gold and shiny, but I had the audiobook arc and the ebook arc, which is just crazy town. But I wound up reading this the beginning of August before it came out because I was so excited about it and I wanted to just rave about it and promote it and all the good stuff. And then obviously I got a physical copy for my shelf. But anyway, I really enjoyed this book. So this is the 4th and final in this series that she's done. Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones, Malibu Rising, and then Carrie Soto is Back. So each one of those books, well, Evelyn I know transcends multiple decades. This book takes place in the 90s, which is sort of the 4th and final decade that she is exploring, that Taylor is exploring. And in this one, we are following Carrie, who was introduced to us in Malibu Rising. So if you haven't already read Malibu Rising, and you dive into this first, which you totally can, you obviously get some information about her role in Malibu Rising, which I would say was completely pivotal to that story, even though she's on the page for a very small amount of time. And I was really curious when I heard this was going to be, that Carrie was going to be the focus of Taylor's new book, to see what she was going to do with her as a character. So when this book opens, it is 1994, and it is 6 years after Carrie has retired from playing tennis, and she's sitting in the stands of the US Open with her father, who was also her tennis coach, who was also a tennis player in his day, and she is watching her record get taken away from her by this new player, Nikki Chan. And Carrie is probably the most competitive with herself, and as she is watching her record get taken away, she's not standing for it, and she has decided that she's going to come out of retirement and do one more season of tournaments and reclaim her record. So I really enjoyed Carrie as a character, and she is someone who has sacrificed everything for her career, and she has not let anything stand in her way. She's determined, she's fierce, she is not here to make friends, she is not here to be liked. She does what she does, she is competitive, she's a top-notch athlete, and in the media in the past, she was known as the battle axe. She was known as being very cold, and she didn't care. She wasn't here for any of that. She was here to win, and she is unapologetic about the fact that she was there to win. But now that she is coming back at 37 and starting over again, and her body doesn't quite move as quickly and it doesn't quite move the same way, but she's not going to let anything stand in her way, which also means she is not only training with her father, but she is also training with another professional tennis player who is near the end of his career, but also has a little bit of something to prove, and is also kind of totally Carrie's ex, this guy named Bo. So we get a lot of her relationship with him, a lot of her sort of confronting who she is now versus who she used to be. We get a lot of the relationship with her father, which is really interesting. And we get to see sort of glimmers of past Carrie when she was in her prime, and then present Carrie. And the book is sort of broken up with the 4 major Grand Slam tournaments that happen over the course of her final season. So you don't need to be a tennis player to enjoy this book, I don't think. I am I would say low-key tennis player fan, so I follow it but not obsessively, but like I understand the sport, I very much enjoy the sport. But once again, we get a real insight into how the media looks at her, how she is critiqued for her determination and for her kind of no holds barred, here to win, no apologies, everything left on the court kind of attitude that she has. And she's not here to appease the press, and she's not here to be, as I said, liked and to be the person who is sort of kowtowing to the media and making sure that she is doing all the things so everybody likes her. And I understand that kind of attitude is not going to necessarily resonate with everybody, but I really appreciated it, especially holistically with the other characters in this 4-book series. And, you know, she does unlikable things and she doesn't always apologize for them. And I feel like it's a real reckoning for her as well. And I don't know if it just resonated with me as a woman and sort of coming to terms with getting older and just how things are changing and how you change as you get older, and sort of the perspective of looking back and looking forward to kind of like the what's next for me. So I really enjoyed this book. I cried, of course. I'm such a crybaby with books lately. But I was really excited for it and I had a great time with it. So huge fan. I have no idea what Taylor Jenkins Reid is going to do next, but loved it. The next book I have is A Star is Born by Byron Lane. So I read this to complete my bingo board for Backlist Bingo that Lindsay and Sarah hosted this summer. And you needed to read a book with a star on the cover. So it says star and there is a star. And this book has been on my shelf for a little bit and I was excited about it. And I would say, like, it was just okay. So I wanted it to be, I don't even want to say I wanted it to be more. I just thought it was fine. And here's where, let's get right into the rub. So we are following Charlie Besson, and he winds up becoming the personal assistant to one of his idols when he was a kid, this woman named Kathy Cannon, who is a Hollywood icon. She's a best-selling author, and it says she is most known for her role as Priestess Talara in a blockbuster sci-fi film series. And she is currently at the point in her life where she's in need of assistance. He's adrift and in need of a lifeline, and they come together and form this relationship. So the hitch is, and it's not really a hitch, but Byron Lane used to be Carrie Fisher's personal assistant for several years. And as much as it's stated over and over and over again, this is not about Carrie Fisher. The similarities between Kathy from that sci-fi series that she was in, as well as other aspects of her life, including her mom living, you know, in the house in her backyard and different elements of her career. I could not shake the Carrie Fisher from it all. And in some ways it was kind of fun to see those nuggets, and in other ways it kind of made me a little bit sad because Kathy is messy and she's not always her best self. So I wound up listening to the audiobook of this, which I definitely felt was a good way in. I was struggling a little bit getting into the character and into the zone of the book when I was reading it. So the audiobook is definitely a good way in. And they kind of develop like this very codependent relationship in some ways, and there's a bit of enabling that's going on both ends of the spectrum, and his commitment to her and how he just doesn't pay attention to the rest of his life. And you hear this all the time. I feel like if you're a personal assistant to somebody famous, like your life is their life and you don't really have a life of your own. And you can see that very much in here. So I think there's a lot of love and affection for probably his time with Carrie Fisher, and you can see the love and affection that Charlie has for Kathy, as well as his frustrations with working for Kathy. But I definitely enjoyed aspects of this, but there were parts of it that just felt like a little bit, I don't know if it was like slow, or it felt like kind of some of the same stories over and over again of things that were happening over the course of, I feel like it's like 3 years that they wind up being together, like being together. She's his boss, the personal assistant's not like romantically together. So we also get to see Charlie interact with the personal assistants of other famous people in Hollywood, and I very much enjoyed those interactions and sort of this inside Hollywood, and how all of those people, like they all go by different nicknames based on who it is that they work for, and kind of that stripping of their own persona and who they are as people, I thought was really, really interesting. And we also get Charlie's relationship with his father and his family, There's a lot of weight to this book and a lot of heavy topics in this book. So if you know anything about Carrie Fisher, it is no secret that she struggled with addiction throughout her entire life. So a lot of that is reflected here in the book as well. So there's a lot of talk of addiction, as I said before, enabling behavior. There's a lot of loss and grief and coping with family dynamics, relationship dynamics, and it just feels like such a thankless job that he has, but he just loves her so much and is so committed to it. And it's sort of how that relationship is both full of love, but also completely destructive. So I enjoyed parts of it, but again, it was really, really hard to not see the Carrie Fisher of it all. And there were parts that were really funny, and at times it was just like absurd and over the top, but I imagine it's probably accurate in the absurdity and over the top of it all that Hollywood could be. So I would say solid read. Definitely the audiobook is a great way into it. I just enjoy the Hollywood, and I think kind of like those glimpses of Hollywood that we were getting through Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I always find that a little bit fascinating, you know, like I said, the inside baseball. So enjoyed it, glad I read it. It's been on my shelf for far too long, and there you go. The next book I did on audio, and it's The Sunday Girl by Pip Drysdale. So I heard about this, I want to say maybe like 2 or 3 months ago on a podcast I was listening to, and please don't ask me which one because I don't remember, but it was a podcast talking about revenge stories. And I was like, I like revenge. I will completely just flag this for a later day. This book was so deliciously dark and messed up, and I feel like revenge to a whole other level, and I was completely here for it. So this one follows a woman named Taylor Bishop, and it says she is hurt, angry, and wants to destroy Angus Hollingsworth in the way he destroyed her, insidiously, irreparably, like a puzzle slowly disassembled. A couple of pieces stolen from it and then discarded, knowing that nobody would ever be able to put it back together again. So Taylor is broken, and she is angry, and she wants to get that revenge, and she starts to read The Art of War, and she makes a plan, and nothing will ever be the same. So I was completely here for this book, and this was one of those books where I feel like it was like we were dark pretty early on in this book, and it just continued to get darker and darker, and I was like, are we gonna keep, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep going with this. I loved it. You guys know, I love me a messed up character. I love me a character who does devilish things, and I love to cheer for a character who at times does terrible devilish things. And I really enjoyed Taylor. So you wanna talk about people who like make mistakes and live with consequences? This is definitely one of those books, but I was sort of channeling every ounce of rage that I had, and maybe this was like revenge fantasy for me. Not that I would do everything Taylor did in this book, but there were definitely elements of this. And I would say she had a reason to be very angry with Angus, who, you know, did her wrong when the book opens. And I was so pleasantly surprised with how much I loved this book. And I remember the podcast talking about it and just saying how it was like very compulsive and like so good. And when I first started, I'm like, I'm sure this will be great fun. It was such great fun. So not Pip Drysdale's first book. I definitely need to check out more by her. My library only has The Sunday Girl, but I know from having done a little online research, I know that she's got more books. So I'm definitely gonna look into more of what she wrote, and I thought it was great. So if you are definitely sort of on the mood, or like in the mood for something like super dark and messed up, this is a really, really great way to scratch that itch, and I just loved it. And I don't want to even like talk about the plot because I just don't even want to give a hint of anything, but this is definitely bingeable. You could definitely consume this in like a day or two at most, and I think you will love it if you enjoy a lot of the messed up books that I like. So not for everybody, but for those of us who like to go a little dark Betty, this is definitely for you. The next book I read is The Younger Wife by Sally Hepworth, and I also wound up doing the audio of this, which was really well done. Totally recommend this on audio. And this is only my second Sally Hepworth book, but I am such a huge fan of hers, and I do have a couple physical books of hers on my shelf somewhere, which I need to get to. But she's such a good writer, and I really enjoyed this book. So this follows two sisters, so they are adults. Their father has decided to get remarried to a woman who's a little bit younger than they are, in like her mid-20s, which they're not totally down for. But the other hitch is he's still actually married to their mom, who is in an institution for an early onset dementia, but he hasn't quite divorced her yet. And by quite, I mean at all. So he is going to divorce their mom and marry this younger woman named Heather. And our main characters, Rachel and Tully, are just like, what is going on here? So this book is obviously about family dynamics, but we get the different perspectives from the two sisters and from Heather, the younger wife, and we get to see sort of everybody's motivations, everybody's secrets, everything that's being kept under cover, and things, of course, just start to bleed out, as they are likely to do in books. The other Sally Hepworth book that I read is The Good Sister, so I really enjoyed the sister dynamic of that book and all of its complications and all of its love, and I feel like she further explores that in this book because there are so many elements of these two sisters, and I think the dynamic of sort of firstborn and secondborn and the different perceptions and how the way you acted when you were younger and the things you hold on to, how you carry that into adulthood, but also they are sort of, they have great love for each other, but their relationship is not always perfect, but they are united in this WTF dad with the younger woman that comes onto the scene. So I really enjoyed seeing all of the different perspectives. I think there was some great, like there were some slow reveals to what the secrets were, but not everything was held out to the final minute. So you slowly start to get elements of what's going on, start to piece together things that are happening in the present and happened in the past. And one of the things that was really interesting about this book when I started to read reviews is I don't know if it's the UK and Australian edition or if it's just the Australian edition, which came out first, has a different ending than the US one. So I actually listened to the US one, but I had a NetGalley arc of it and went back and looked at that and realized I had a different ending than the arc that I have. So I'm guessing they changed it for whatever reason for the US, and I can't talk about it. Like, anything I say is gonna give something away. But it was so interesting to me, and I'm so glad I wound up reading other people's reviews too and found that out, because I felt like I really would have missed out on part of the conversation. But what an interesting conversation to have about endings changing and what maybe is more palatable for one audience versus another. So I don't know if it has something to do with that, or if it has something to do with sort of like, you know, when they preview movies and you get the audience response. I don't even know. But all of that aside, regardless of the ending, regardless of how you like your books to end, or like what sort of ending you would like for these characters, I think this is just really well written. I do appreciate the humor that she has in this, but again, there's also, and I keep talking about this, I need a better word for this, some weighty moments, some heavier topics, and the very interesting perspective about their, you know, their mother is alive, she has dementia, she doesn't always know who they are, they go to visit her, and just the pain of that, I feel, was so well done and so well conveyed and gut-wrenching in so many ways, and how these two girls are grappling with what's happening to their mom and what their father is doing and him moving on and dealing with that piece of it. And it was just very, very interesting on so many different levels, and I really enjoyed this book. So I'm gonna put my hands down because I'm using them too much. But I definitely need to dig into Sally Hepworth's backlist because I've heard great things about the books that she wrote, and I would like to read them. And why don't I just maybe shout out a couple of the titles instead of just talk in really vague circles. So as I mentioned, I read The Good Sister. So I have The Family Next Door. She wrote a book called The Mother's Promise, which I'm not familiar with. And I have The Mother-in-Law. And I feel like The Mother-in-Law and The Family Next Door are the ones I really hear the most about, which is probably why I bought them. So let me know if you guys have read either of these books and if you would recommend I pick up one over the other. But definitely a big fan of her writing. So there's like some element of mystery to it, but not hardcore thriller. I would say maybe like a domestic mystery and the family dynamics, but very much enjoyed it. Audiobook is tremendous. Check it out. Okay, the next book I could talk about all day long, but I'm going to keep it to a minimum because I think you need to go into The Last Housewife Blind by Ashley Winstead. I talked about this book a ton when I did my book haul, so I don't know if that went up yet. Okay, if it did, you'll know about it. If it didn't, it's coming. But I obsessively loved this book, and I feel like that should come to a surprise to absolutely nobody. And if you follow me on any social media, this is not a surprise. And if you were wondering about one of the books that is going to make my best of the year list, Also not a surprise that this is going to be it. So I am such a diehard fan of Ashley Winstead, and I thought this book was just absolutely incredible. So I knew that this was a cult book. I didn't know too much else about it, and I'm glad I didn't, because I felt like every page was a revelation, like every page was something new, and that I just could totally get lost in story. So we are following a woman named Shay. She is currently living in Texas. She is married. And when the book opens, she is literally like out by her pool, painting her toenails, listening to her favorite true crime podcast, which is actually hosted by a friend of hers that she grew up with, this guy named Jamie. So Jamie is covering this mysterious death that has just happened at Whitney College, which is a college in New York. And this woman, Laurel Hargrove, was found hanging from a tree, and the circumstances around her death are mysterious at best. And Shay is listening to this podcast, and Laurel was her roommate and her best friend in college. And as soon as Shay hears the story, she knows that something is very wrong, and that Laurel's death, 99%, has something to do with something that they did back in college. So she goes back to New York, where she swears she would never return, to investigate what happened. And we get past and present timelines. We get a podcast element to this, although I feel like in a somewhat unique way how the podcast is used in this as a storytelling device. And when I say this book is dark, I feel like dark is not a strong enough word to describe how dark. Pitch black is how this book is pitched. If Dark Betty went Dark Betty, this is how this book is. This is not going to be a for everybody book. There is a laundry list of trigger warnings in the front of this book, and I strongly suggest you check it out if you have any hesitation or trepidation about picking this book up. But this book pulls zero punches. It is very raw. It is at times very ugly in behavior. It is not afraid to go to extremely uncomfortable places. And when I was reading this, I was having that same feeling of when I was reading Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier. Stories have nothing to do with one another, but from an author perspective, from a reader perspective, my complete amazement at Ashley Winstead holding what I feel is nothing back. It is very fearless writing to me. I feel like she put everything on the page, ugliness, darkness, all of it. And I also felt like I felt when I was reading The Handmaid's Tale, where I was uncomfortable. I couldn't believe this is really happening. And listening to Margaret Atwood talk about how there's nothing in that book that she wrote about that didn't actually happen at some point in history, that's very much what this book is too. Everything that's in this book exists in real life, and I feel like that is what makes some of these books so much more disturbing, is you know they are writing about things in a fictionalized way, but things that are really happening out in the world. And I just thought Shay was such a dynamic character. She is another one who is going to make choices that you are not going to agree with. She is very unapologetic about certain things. She is messy as messy can be, but she is also super determined. She is super fierce, and she is a smart, smart lady. And I just loved this book. Obsessed, obsessed. So I honestly, this was another one of those books where I closed it and I immediately wanted to start over again, and I actually did, because there were some things, like in any book, you get to the end and then you were like, nope, I need to go back and like revisit those chapters or those pieces, those elements where there were actually, you know, the breadcrumbs were there the entire time, or things that take on different meaning. But I just think she is an absolute force to be reckoned with, and absolutely tremendous. So if you guys have curiosity about this, I think it's great. I get that it's not a for everybody book, but in listening to an interview with Ashley Winstead, she had talked about, you know, how partway through it, she kind of had some concerns about writing a book that she knew sort of on premise alone, some people were gonna write off and not give a chance to, and was she sort of shooting herself in the foot as a new author by doing that, but she also felt compelled to write the book. So I love that she wrote the book. I hope that people will give it a chance, and if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you, but hopefully people will give it a read, and hopefully they will enjoy it on top of that. But absolutely loved it. I have no words. I have a ton of words, but no more that I can say here without going spoilery. And speaking of spoilery, I will list a podcast down below where she does an interview that is completely full of spoilers, which I highly recommend as well because it's so interesting to hear the story behind the story. I devoured that podcast and it was so fascinating to me, so I will list that down below for you guys too. And then the last book that I listened to is Young Rich Widows, and this was a multiple author collab by Kimberly Bell, Lane Fargo, Kate Holohan, and Vanessa Lilly. And this is an Audible original, and this was great fun. I also just saw that the sequel for the book has been approved, so there's another one coming in the series, which is great because this is one of those books that absolutely wrapped up the story, but the door was cracked open so that you could continue with it if the story wanted to go on. So I'm really happy to see what's going to happen next. But this book is set in 1985 in Providence, Rhode Island. And it says, when the four partners of a prominent law firm are killed in a mysterious plane crash, their widows must come together to uncover the truth in this explosive edge-of-your-seat novel. So this book opens at the Christmas party at the law firm when a phone call comes in that these four partners' plane has exploded. And of course, the four widows are there at the party. And it is all of the secrets and lies and the bag that these four partners left the widows holding and the complete mess they have left them in. So I didn't quite know. There was like a part of me where I was like, this is like 80s fun and it's gonna be light and funny. And there's some light, funny moments to this. It definitely gave me some Married to the Mob vibes. So the audiobook has 4 different narrators to it. And one of them, I talked about this in my Goodreads review, very much reminded me of Mercedes Rule from Married to the Mob in her voice and everything. So it's all I could picture when I was listening to this book. And it's one of those books where I feel like it can be just like delicious fun. And there were a few elements where I was a little bit like, where I didn't understand always why the ladies wound up not really clothed in certain situations or very scantily clad. It didn't seem like that was necessary, and I didn't quite get why we were doing that for these ladies, but there were other elements of it where I was just having such a great time with it and such great fun. So once again, it's a lot of secrets and lies. It is these women being put in a very dangerous situation, their families being put in a very dangerous situation, and it's very much a what would you do for your family? What would you do to save your family? So it's who's the villain, who's coming after them, who's behind what happened with the plane crash, what hot mess did these partners get themselves into? So I think if you're looking for just a fun kind of bingeable book, this is definitely a good way to go. I will be, as I said, very curious to see kind of the what happens next. And if you're just looking for some fun 80s nostalgia, this is also really fun. So there's all those little pop culture moments that are tossed into this. And it was just great warm fuzzies for those of us who remember 1985 very well, but I enjoyed it. I also very much enjoy these 4 women, be it their books, the writing advice, and the collaboration between them. So I thought that was really interesting because I feel like usually you get like 2 authors who are writing a book, or you get like a group of short stories. But like I said, I love that they came together and did this, and it was just sort of a delicious fun time. And the last book I read this month, which I did not think I was gonna finish on the 31st, and when I tell you I dropped everything because I couldn't stop reading this book, like I read it into the late night, was Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. This book, you guys, can we see the situation here? This book was on kind of a watch list for me. I had heard people talking about it and I was like, that sounds kind of interesting. Kind of was giving me some Emily Henry vibes, and I was like, I'll definitely have to check that out at some point. But while I was listening to that Ashley Winstead spoiler full podcast, which I will list down below for you guys, she was talking about the next book that she is writing, her next thriller book. And it is a serial killer book. It comes out in, I want to say, August, September of next year. It's called Midnight is the Darkest Hour, which I think is absolutely brilliant. And she was trying to describe it, and she said it's kind of like Every Summer After, but with serial killers. So I immediately went to the bookstore that night and I was like, I need to read this book now. I need to read this book because I trust everything Ashley Winstead says. I need to figure out how she is going to take the warm and fuzzies of this book and turn it into a serial killer book, and I just need to. I need to. So I did. So this book totally reminded me of Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren, which is the only book by them that I have read, but I absolutely love that book. And I know for some people they felt like it was similar to that and you had to pick and choose, like read one or the other. I think that this is such a solid book. I think this is absolutely worth reading. And I think if you liked Love in Other Words, you will very much enjoy this book because we are getting sort of a past and present relationship. We are getting two people who meet as teenagers, and then we get to see them as adults in the present day, and we get to see the evolution of their relationship. So that's where the similarities are between the two books. But beyond that, I don't think you have to pick or choose one or the other, and I think this book is absolutely worth reading, obviously. So this book follows a woman named Persephone, and she goes by Percy sort of throughout the entire book. And when she is, I want to say 12 years old, it's the summer after 7th grade, her parents get a lake house in a town called Barry's Bay. And this is set in Canada. It's outside of Toronto, and they get there and they of course instantly meet the family who lives next door, who live there year round. And it's two boys. So it's Sam, who is her age, Charlie is his older brother. I want to say he's like 3 years older, and their mom, and their father had passed away recently. So it's just the three of them. And sort of instantly they start hanging out and start doing things together. And it's this very small lakeshore town. So we get to see the evolution of the relationship between Sam and Persephone. And at times it's very sweet and very innocent because again, they're meeting when they're like 12 years old. And then we get to see in the present day. So when the book opens, and this is on the back of the book as well, it's the catalyst of the entire book, Percy gets the call that their mother has passed away. And she returns to Barry's Bay where she hasn't been for 12 years. And all we know is that something really terrible happened 12 years ago that made her not return, and she hasn't spoken to Sam in those 12 years. So we follow, as I said, the 6 summers and then this one weekend, and it's intertwined together. And I just absolutely loved this book. I just thought this book was genuinely so well written. I loved the conversations, I loved the banter, I loved the wit, I loved the very heavy emotional parts of this, and I loved to see the evolution of their relationship and then coming together now and trying to figure out sort of who you are as adults together versus who you were when you were younger. And of course there's secrets and there's some mystery to what happened in the past, and I just was completely sucked into this book. And this kind of falls under the book I didn't know I needed to read, which I've talked about a lot lately, which is not necessarily outside my comfort zone because it also totally gives me Emily Henry vibes, but more of, like I said, like this was on my radar. I had heard about it, but I wasn't rushing out to get it because, you know, thrillers are typically what I rush out to get. But I was so engrossed in this book. I don't even know how many times I cried in this book. And there is a great afterword to this book, not like story-wise, but a conversation with Carly Fortune. This is her debut, which also blows me away, but a behind the book is what she calls it. And I think there were elements of this part of the book which read after you've read the book because you don't want anything spoiled, duh. And she talks about sort of how she came to this book from an author perspective, which I found extremely interesting. But then she also talks about the book itself and how she wanted to write a book about people who are flawed and people who are messy and people who make mistakes and living with the consequences of those mistakes, and sort of in a very similar but different way how I talk a lot about Jennifer Hillier and her writing. I love characters who feel very authentic to me, who feel very real to me. I don't have a lot of patience for books where all the characters are perfect and the characters don't mess up and the characters don't make bad choices. And you don't have to agree with the choices that characters make in all of the books, but if there's some understanding. So I really found it interesting from her perspective about how she created these characters and knowing that, you know, they were going to make mistakes and they were going to mess up, and, you know, what can you come back from, what can't you come back from. And I just really enjoyed it. So I think this is absolutely tremendous. I would say if you loved Love in Other Words, and if you're out there and you're like, what's Love in Other Words, also check that one out because it's tremendous. But what a banging way to end the, like, I consider summer ending on August 31st. Like when Labor Day rolls around, to me, summer is over. I know it's not, but it is for me. And this was just, what a perfect way to sort of end the summer. And I just loved it so much. It was just so, so good. Highly, hugely recommend, like 5 stars. I can't wait to read her next one, which is like already on my wish list on Amazon because it's been announced. And I just think it's absolutely tremendous. And huge fan of a debut author who just completely crushes it and is getting so many accolades, and it's on the bestseller list. And I think it's just absolutely deserved on all fronts. So yay. Anyway, yes, read it. Okay, so very long second wrap up of August. I'm sorry, I know I just had so much to say, but I just had such a great reading month and I just, you know, want to scream and champion these books. So let me know what your favorite book of the month was, and I'm going to keep this ending super short. So let me know down below. Thanks for being here. If you made it this far, thank you for watching the entire video. I know it's rambly, I say that all the time too, but I do really appreciate it, and I hope everyone is doing great, and I'll see you guys in another video really soon. Bye everybody.